1 o'clock I'll start. Oh, it's helpful. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Arabian Peninsula Institute. For those who are joining the program for the first time, my name is Irina Tsukerman. I am one of the fellows here. With us, we have a distinguished panel of experts to discuss what is happening in Iraq with relations to the war in Gaza. And we have Dalia Al-Akidi, Michael Pergent, and Behnam Ben Taliblu. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before I give the floor to each of the speakers to give a brief overview of the current situation and their thoughts about it, a couple of words of introduction about the latest developments on the front of Iraq and increasingly Syria. The latest updates that we have been hearing is that US forces have been attacked 4 times by the various militias in the region since yesterday's 3rd airstrikes, and 3 times since last night and once this morning. All of these attacks took place in Syria. So far, no injuries or significant damage to bases, but that marks 52 attacks on US forces in Iraq and Syria since October 17th, about 10 days since the Hamas attack on Israel and the breakout of the war between Israel and Hamas, which is now largely taking place in Gaza. What does that mean for the stability of the region? Apparently, and according to our sources, sources that are close to the Iraqi government, there's been an ongoing conversation with the Iraqi militias not to take actions in Baghdad and to limit the actions inside Iraq as much as possible due to the concerns about Iraqi stability and the attraction for foreign investments. Let us remind ourselves that before the war in Hamas, US has been investing a significant amount of money in contracts in Iraq. Also, Saudi Arabia and Emirates invested approximately $6 billion just within months before the breakout of the war. Different PMUs and even Qais al-Khazali are included in this camp concerned about what may happen to the investment opportunities if the war in Gaza takes on an iteration of outright attacks inside Iraq. Meanwhile, in the background of all of this is the recent visit of Prime Minister Soudani to Tehran. And one can only presume that behind the scenes, there have also been ongoing conversations between Baghdad and Iran about limiting the possibility of destabilization of Iraq. We should also take into account the most recent statement by Akram Kabi and what that means, and that will be discussed in more depth later in the panel. Iran is also looking at these developments with interest because Iraq has become an important financial base for Tehran's other operations. So we have been seeing increasingly more attacks, particularly on US troops from Syria. Nevertheless, a new Iraqi militia, Iran-backed Iraqi militia, recently attacked Israel. Who they are and why they're joining the fight now is also something we'll be discussing today. So in light of these important developments, let's start with Michael and give him a word to overview this military situation, and then we'll talk to Behnam a little bit about Iran's interest in all of these and how they are managing this development, and then Dalia to understand what exactly is happening in Iraq itself with the various segments of population and how they're reacting. And then we'll proceed to more questions and discussion, followed by Q&A from the audience, who can send the questions through the chat here.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be on this panel with two people that I know very well and who care about these issues. And of course, Irina, she's been covering a lot of these issues from Iran to Ukraine to the Middle East to everywhere. So my quick take on this is, we keep hearing this term in Washington, D.C., that we're building institutions to counter Iranian influence. If you look at Iraq, and if you look at Lebanon, we've built institutions in the Lebanese armed forces in Lebanon and in the Iraqi security forces in Iraq that have been co-opted by Iran, that are not there to counter Iran. And what's interesting about the action since October 7th, with the increase in attacks by these Iraqi militias and the LAF not doing a thing, you have to ask this question, why are we continuing to fund these groups? And why is it that we weren't able to ask Baghdad? Can somebody mute that? Talking? Yeah, I can hear the translation for some reason. Okay, anyway, back to this. At no time were we able to talk to Baghdad and ask Baghdad to stop the militias, because they can't. If anything, Baghdad continues to allow the militias to run rampant. Why is that? Because every key position in the Iraqi Ministry of Interior or Ministry of Defense is a Badr Corps member. And if you don't know who Badr is, for your audience, Badr is Iran's premier proxy inside of Iraq. And Hadi al-Amri, who runs Badr, is also in charge of the Hashd al-Shabi. He is the only non-designated Iranian proxy in Iraq, correction. And for some reason, Republicans and Democrats that continue to say that what Iran is doing is wrong, continue to not put Hadi al-Amri on the sanctions list. So this is a big reveal, right? This shows not only did we fail in Iraq after 20 years and hand Iraq to Iran, but we can't even rely on what's in place to stop what's happening, because they've been co-opted and they're like-minded, to be honest with you. And what's very concerning here is it's the business contracts, right? It's the money. The only goal of the United States when it comes to Iraq is to keep ISIS from coming back and to keep the oil flowing. And in that, you've allowed Iran to use Iraq as part of their, we call it the land bridge, right? The Shia axis of power. It's what Iran wants to use. They want to use Iraqi militias to target the U.S., to move weapons into Syria, to attack Americans in Iraq and Syria, and also to destabilize the Levant. This is by design. And what are we doing about it? We've been attacked over 50 times at this point. And what traditionally happens is Brett McGurk, who's in charge of the Middle East desk at the NSC, will call Baghdad and say, hey, we're about to hit some sites in Abu Kamal. We're about to hit some sites in Al-Tanaf. Can you tell the militias, primarily Kitab Hezbollah, Harakat Nujaba, all these other groups, you mentioned Akram al-Kabi, you mentioned Qais Khazali, so we have Asab al-Haq also. They will warn them that there's going to be a strike in order to minimize casualties. And that's not deterrence. That is not deterrence. That is not going to stop Iran from doing what it's doing with its proxies. It's a message of weakness. And I know we killed, 6 Iran-backed militia members in Syria, but I'm questioning whether or not that was by accident. And somehow there's back channels in Baghdad with Brett McGurk saying, we're sorry about that. We did not mean to kill these militiamen. We warned you that we're going to hit this building, and they stayed in the building. But that's the current situation right now. I'll leave it at that. But this is an embarrassment to anybody who's ever served in Iraq. I served there for 6 years, both in uniform and out of uniform. This is what we created. This is what we warned about. And now it's being weaponized against us, and we're sitting on our hands.
Behnam, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Irina. I just wanted to echo Michael real quick. It's a pleasure to share the virtual stage with all of you. Dalia, who have heard great things about and finally had the first time to meet here, and And Michael, we go back to the BC, to the before COVID days of the max pressure world on Iran. And Irina, thank you for all your support and coordination in this space. Listen, I just want to put a little bit of a footnote to what Michael was saying, which is that this is indeed the third time that the US used the kinetic tool against Iran-backed militias. It did so in Syria. And I want to zoom out a little bit and paint a picture. Because traditionally, if you look at reporting from 2022, 2023, the US has actually been getting hit from Iraq into Syria. And then that you compound with the strikes that are now happening at positions in northern Iraq and western Iraq, where the US is either co-located with Iraqi forces or exists in facilities. The US is afraid of using the kinetic tool in Iraq. There is simply no other way to put it. And Iran understands this, which is why you're seeing the uptick of attacks. But also, and again, most unfortunately, there is a ability by Iran and its network that it calls the axis of resistance to use violence to achieve political aims. And the political aim here, linking it to part of the topic you had, Irina, which is the Gaza war, the Israel's conflict with Hamas following the heinous terror attack of October 7. What is the linkage between this heartland of the Middle East, this Iraq-Syria land bridge, to that conflict? And the reason for the spike in these attacks, both in Iraq and in Syria, and the reason even for the thrice, and in my view and Michael's view, and probably your view and Dalia's view as well, but I don't want to speak on your behalf, largely insufficient U.S. military response to date traces back to what Iran wanted out of igniting this conflict spiral away from the Levant. One might think that, they would ignite Lebanese Hezbollah immediately, or the Assad regime in Syria would play an even greater role immediately. But the kind of immediate, following 10 days, October 17th military response by Iran was the activation of these proxies in the heartland of the Middle East to strike at U.S. positions, such that the thing the U.S. fears most, meaning a wider war, regional escalation, becomes a political handcuff that America puts on Israel to avoid continuing to getting hit in Iraq and Syria. So Iran's strategy here is, by turning up the heat in Iraq and Syria, it is thinking it can constrain U.S. political and material support for Israel, as well as having the messaging come out about the longer the Israelis succeed in Gaza, be it against Hamas or clearing and holding territory, the more these attacks will grow in quantity and quality. Unless we forget, Lebanese Hezbollah is now stepping up those attacks. It's not just drones, it's anti-tank weapons, and perhaps most shockingly, damningly, the Houthis, which are in possession of the longest of long-range strike capabilities out of any proxy in Iran's so-called axis of resistance. They're the only proxy to date with land attack cruise missiles. They're the only proxy to date with medium-range ballistic missiles. In 2017, the Houthis talked about wanting to enter a conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, or between Israel and Hezbollah. That was 6 years ago. Now they've actually acted on it. 6 years ago, the world laughed them off when they said that. Now they actually have the capability to act on that intent. So Iran's political goal in the heartland is to bring these proxies that it has created or co-opted, and to turn on the firepower against the US to get America to do, at most these pinprick strikes that Michael was talking about. In my view, so long as we have those strikes at facilities and not at personnel, and so long as we concentrate them in Syria and not against Iraq, and so long as they are formed in the absence of a larger Iraq-Syria policy, those strikes are not going to have the deterrent effect that we want. Also, so long as we continue to react to strikes rather than actually use the military tool in a proactive fashion to go after these arsenals, go after these depots, we're going to continue to fail in that regard as well. So in short, the US will fail to use the military tool to achieve political ends. And this is when our adversaries are most adept at using that military tool to achieve political ends. And one reason I want to, again, bring this up is there are revolutions in the military capabilities of Iran's proxies, both in Iraq and Syria. We just talked about the Houthi strike capabilities. There was just a missile displayed about a week and a half ago by the so-called resistance in Iraq, the Al-Aqsa 1. It closely resembles, but is not a clean carbon copy of an Iranian close range or short range, single stage solid fuel short range ballistic missile. The similarity is striking. It is, in my view, intentional. Allegedly, the range is 700 kilometers. We don't know if it actually does go 700 kilometers, but that does mean that, Israel is well within Iran's ring of fire, even from Western Iraq, even from Anbar province. And this is just worth noting for the audience because Iraq is in the title. These are ranges Saddam Hussein wished he had after the 1991 Persian Gulf War. These were ranges that after the UNSCOM mission, Saddam's Scuds and other long-range strike capabilities were trimmed down to 150 kilometers in much of the 1990s. And even when they went up by 10 kilometers, it became a political crisis. So talk about, back to the future again. We are entering a world not just where Iran is more comfortable using these proxies to achieve political ends, and we already said what that is, but that the capabilities of these proxies are growing. And that is going to have real world effects for when the US does use the military tool and continues to fail to achieve a political end that it wants.
Thank you so much, and we'll be back to you with more questions very shortly. But for now, I'd like to give Dalia the floor to talk about the overall social and cultural context in Iraq. It's been a long time since we've heard anything about the population, how they're being affected by this militia activity, and of course the strikes on the US and this increasing back and forth with Israel. If you could talk a little about that, Dalia, and then we'll of course follow up with a lot more afterwards.
Thank you, Irina, so much for having me, and I could not agree more with both statements or with what I've heard so far. But before we talk about the social effect and and what's happening in Iraq, we need to look at what's happening from a political point of view. In the turbulent landscape of Middle Eastern geopolitics, Iraq finds itself in a delicate balancing as it grapples with the escalation of what's happening between the terrorists of Hamas and Israel. The leader of the ruling coalition in Iraq are publicly expressing support for the so-called Palestinian resistance in Gaza. However, behind closed doors, discussions on the participation of Iraqi factions and the ongoing clashes against the Israelis have yet to yield a decisive position in Iraq. The ultimate decision on involvement will be made in consultation with Iran if the situation evolves. It's not up to the Iraqi government, sadly, if they want to the intervention, especially if the intervention of international powers such as the United States. The delicate approach reflects Iraq's complex web of alliance and the need to navigate the problematic dynamics of the region. Iranian Foreign Minister Hussein Abdul Amir al-Lahyan recently conveyed to the his Qatari counterpart that the expansion of the complex in Gaza is inescapable. The repercussions of these conflicts are not confined by the borders of Israel and the Palestinian areas. They are echoing in Iraq, especially on the security front, and the Iraqi people are faced with all what's going to happen to them. Iraq faces a very risky situation as fear amount that Iraqi forces and the pro-Iran militias may become fully involved in the conflict. So far, they're in and out, they're very shy, but you can never predict what they're gonna do, especially if Iran decides so. The political landscape in Iraq is marked by confusion and division and how to respond to the unfolding events. The Iraqi people also are divided and confused. We've seen on social media, two different groups of Iraqis that are very upset and they are so pro the government, and therefore they're so pro Iran that they want to be part of the conflict, while other Iraqis or the second group that says Palestine or the Palestinian cause, it's not mine. Throughout the years, we've seen what the Iraqi militias, the pro-Iran militias, have done to Palestinians inside Iraq. They went from, I believe, 65,000 Palestinians in Iraq to about 3,500. They all left because they were under the persecution of the militias. The thing is, the lack of the consistency raises concern that American forces might respond to these attacks inside Iraq, and the delicate balance that Iraq seeks to maintain, or the prime minister is seeking to maintain, is under threat. And the consequences could extend beyond the immediate regional conflicts. The government is caught between its historic ties with the US, and then the pressure to align with Iran, which is a significant regional power with, of course, they share interest in countering Israel. I believe that whatever is going to happen and what's happening would affect Iraqis themselves. And I believe that Iraqis are starting to comprehend that the same militias that took a stand and attacked the Iraqi youth and the young protesters in Al-Hurriya Square are the same ones that are acting right now. So they are very confused between what's happening in Israel and between the same people that they're targeting, any Iraqi moderate voices or any Iraqi youth voices that are yearning for freedom and to be away or not to be part of the US-Iran-Israel conflict.
Thank you so much for your comments. Now back to Michael. I want to get back to this idea of various Iraqi factions being concerned about this balance that Dalia just mentioned, and being concerned that the situation could get out of control. I mentioned earlier a statement by Akram Kabi, and this attempt to kind of restrain a reaction, prevent escalation, and this general concern about containing the situation in Gaza, and the fact that despite the seemingly anemic response by the US is actually managing to prevent Iraq from getting out of control as well. There seems to be a general sentiment that the ball is in Israel's court, not Hamas. Do you agree with that? And what do you make of the statement by Akram Kabi, Michael?
Well, I want to put it this way. We have very low expectations for the government of Iraq from Baghdad. They cannot constrain the militias. The U.S. forces in Iraq, this is the most dangerous part, is they're almost hostage. They're there to keep ISIS from returning, yet the biggest threat against them are the militias. And the biggest threat against them, Baghdad's doing nothing about. Baghdad completely says there's nothing we can do about this, even though all the militia leaders are on the Baghdad payroll, which means they're also on the U.S. payroll, because we continue to give the MOD and the MOI money. And the budget for the Hashd al-Shabi, for these militias, is $2 billion a year. They are the highest paid armed force inside of Iraq. They get paid more than anyone in the Iraqi army, and they are directly under the control of Iran through Abu Fadak from Kitab Hezbollah and Hadi al-Amr from Badr Corps. And, Akram al-Kabi, he's a militia leader, He's a militia leader. I think it's Kitab Imam Ali or Harakam Nujaba. I always forget whether Haji Shibble and Akram al-Kabi, but they're both, we have to remember, during the ISIS campaign, the militias got their butts kicked every time they confronted ISIS. It wasn't until after U.S. airstrikes in support of what Iraqi security forces we could actually work with cleared an area that the Hashid al-Shabi would rush in and say, Ya Hussein, we're here, we liberated this city. And they were decimated. They don't fight at the battalion or brigade level. They rush a target, and they rush a target after the target's been destroyed. And so they are the lowest hanging fruit for the United States right now to establish a deterrence policy. If you want to send a message to Hezbollah, you kill Iraqi militia leaders. If you want to send a message to Tehran, you kill Iraqi militia leaders. If you want to send a message to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, you kill these militia leaders that are targeting Americans. It's that simple. And I would even take it a step further. Until Iran feels pain directly, meaning the IRGC, you know, when Trump said there were 55 targets that he was ready to hit after we took out Qasem Soleimani, he made that very clear to the Iranian people that it was nothing, there was no population center that was a target. It was all the regime, and it was all IRGC targets. And we got enough feedback from the diaspora and also Iranians that that would be okay. I know that's still the case today. If we want to send a deterrence message, a strong deterrence message, Iran has to be threatened. Something has to be taken away. The administration is not willing to do any of that. The administration wants to keep this local, wants to say this is only about Hamas and Israel, and these Iraqi militias, this is just something we've been dealing with even prior to the Gaza conflict. They'd be correct, because they've sent a message to Iran since the Biden administration took office that they are not going to respond to these attacks. They delisted the Houthis, as Ben talked about, day one. They took off the terrorist designation from the Houthis, day one. That was an overture towards Iran that they were willing to, re-engage on the JCPOA, on the Iran deal. Then they started moving Patriot systems out of Saudi Arabia. Then they started sending other messages. I mean, every message that the Biden administration has sent to Iran since they took office is, Yalla, Fadl, welcome, hurry, welcome, the door's open, green light chaos, do what you want. And we're seeing that now. And China's watching, Russia's watching, everyone's watching this administration. And if you look at the rise of ISIS and you look at the rise of other threats against the United States, it happens during the last year prior to a U.S. election when the enemy perceives Washington, D.C. as being weak, as being unfocused, as being, just being so encumbered by its own ego and its own ineffectiveness to be, just be a doormat. And what's our enemies know is it's the same people that Obama used. It's the Secretary of Defense is the same general that was in Iraq when ISIS rose up, who said we should leave. He's the same guy that at CENTCOM that called it the JV team. He was in charge of CENTCOM at that time. We have to remember that Anthony Blinken was in this also. Brett McGurk, Sullivan, all of them the same people. The same people that gave you the Iran deal, the same people that gave us ISIS, are now the same people that have lost to the Taliban in Doha, that lost to Iran in Vienna, that lost to Putin in Ukraine initially, and are losing now. And our enemies look at the calendar and say, we got 12 months to continue this because this administration is not interested. So it doesn't matter what Akram al-Akabi says. It only matters what the United States does. And until this administration is willing to hit some low-hanging fruit, these Shia militias in Iraq that are directly tied to Iran, this deterrence message is going to fall flat. And this is probably going to escalate.
Thank you so much. And before my next question to Behnam, I'm just reminding anyone in the audience that if you wish to ask a question, feel free to do so via chat, and I will read them out loud after the next round of questions. So the question for Behnam refers to the visit to Iran by Prime Minister Soudani, which I mentioned earlier. Aside from this concern about destabilization of Iraq, what else do you think they were talking about? And do you think there is a genuine concern in whether in Tehran or Baghdad circles that the military destruction of Hamas leadership inside Gaza, and I'm being very specific about that for a reason, because I think the fight against Hamas is much bigger than the fight against their leadership in Gaza, but that's for another discussion. Do you think their concern is that that particular mission, once complete, could escalate to include Iraq and other Iranian targets? Do you think there's a concern that Israel and its allies could be out on a bigger mission?
Well, it's a very good question. Let me just put a small caveat to my friend Michael's comment there on the 55 strikes, which was it manifested itself into a needless political problem just because of wording. So just like right now there are qualms with the wording of the press releases that tend to follow the limited kinetic self-defense precision strikes that the U.S. takes in Syria, which politically dampen a military move. We are debating now how useful that military move is. The president's tweet that included the word cultural sites definitely threw off that deterrent message and allowed for the adversary to be able to play up things that, again, ended up only being in the adversary's interest and not in the U.S. interest. So language.
One finger. He put that in quotations, and what he meant was the nuclear sites that they were calling cultural sites, and that was understood.
I hope that was the case. Unfortunately, no own goals. The U.S. cannot afford any more own goals from the left or from the right, and that begins with messaging. And this is a bipartisan foreign policy problem. There are more successes on the other side of the aisle on the ledger, on the Iran file for sure. There's a greater area of convergence for me and Michael there for sure. But in this instance, it becomes a matter of no own goals. And to bring that into your question about the Iraqi prime minister's trip, look at the own goals of the imaging of Washington in this case. You had a trip the day before by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, clad in a self-protective jacket and almost like a pseudo military dress, if you will, because of the protests that we saw in Sadr City the evening before. It doesn't send the right message about the U.S. trusting the nature of the partner in Baghdad that Michael talked in spades about, as well as, of course, the credibility of the U.S. tool. And of course, the nature of the strength that the U.S. may wish to project in case things get out of hand. And it also doesn't help the political optics that one day the Iraqis are meeting with the Americans and the other day they're summoned back to their quote unquote patron in Tehran. And that's precisely what Khamenei was trying to do, score a political win first. Before we even get to what could have been discussed, is to say that you send the Secretary of State, but I bring him to me. I bring the Iraqi prime minister to me. That was one clear message that Tehran was going to say. You may be whispering sweet nothings in his ear about de-escalation and staying out of the conflict and staying on the periphery. And ultimately, the goal, I would say, a shared goal right now of the U.S. and Israel, no matter the political messaging about it, is have all of Iran's axis of resistance try to stay on the sidelines. Admittedly, they're failing, but try to stay on the sidelines while Israel works against Hamas in Gaza. And to say that that goal will be impeded by what Iran can bring online, and by Iran trying to talk about the need for Iraq to step up its role in the axis of resistance. And you see it in all the cross-border strikes. You see it in all the Iran-backed escalation activity from the militias. You've had more than a decade and a half of Iran puncturing the Iraqi state, puncturing Iraqi society, puncturing Iraqi cultural and religious institutions, and even puncturing the Iraqi economy for sanctions busting, money laundering, you name it. Now they're trying to kind of co-opt the political tool at the highest level and to nullify a political message. So I think the trip was all about showing that Iran can bring more of the axis of resistance online. And indeed, as successful as the regime has been in the short term, the medium to long term is that the regime is actually in a catch-22, that there has always been the potential in all of these jurisdictions where they have proxies or partners for each one of those jurisdictions to become another Vietnam for Iran. But it never was the case, because in all of those areas where the US said there is no military solution, primarily Iran worked to effectuate a military solution through a proxy. So all the places where we showed restraint, they doubled down, and they did so using the military tool. And so for the future of the war in Gaza affecting all of this, Iran believes that by gradually bringing more of these forces online, in some places like the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria against the Americans, and then in other theaters, the Assad regime in Syria, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen against Israel, it can politically try to constrain and militarily limit or politically distract the scope of operations for Israel, erode American support for Israel over time, and even erode Israeli civilian population support for the war effort against Hamas in Gaza. And the goal of this to say is that there is no military tool against Iran's network. So the political strategy they're trying to effectuate here is to say that not only should you not move from defeating Hamas to taking on another member of the axis of resistance, we will do everything we can to pump the political brakes on your military successes against Hamas. And they're using the military tool to find a way to pump the political brakes. And the undistributed middle between the military tool of Iran and the political tool is the fact that they have to play up US concerns about escalation, about a wider war, to get America again to intervene to restrain Israel. Look at the mixed messaging over time, not political, but even military, right? As much as the US is saying don't, quote unquote, no, or don't intervene for the Iranians and for the Shia militia and for Lebanese Hezbollah, I'm sure Iran and Lebanese Hezbollah is riding a high right now, because it takes two carriers and a nuclear-powered sub to be able to signal deterrence against a non-state actor. And still, no one is constrained. And still, they're more permissive. And still, there are strikes by militias in Iraq and Syria. Still, the Houthis are coming online. Still, Hezbollah today actually was stepping up its attacks. Last night and today, you had the IDF spokesperson have to double down yesterday because of the nature of the fear of this cross-border stuff, igniting a third Lebanon war on Israel's doorstep. So the way Iran has its insurance policy to save its proxies and to bail out its version of low-hanging fruit, which is Hamas in Gaza, is to bring more of these elements online selectively to spook America into this fear of a wider war, to limit the duration and the success of the Israeli operation in Gaza. It's a gamble. It's a catch-22. Hezbollah was not created to bail out Hamas. Hezbollah was created both for the steady death by 1,000 cuts that the regime has against Israel, as well as to pose as a conventional deterrent against any overt kinetic Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear program. It is not designed to expend every single one of its 150,000 rockets, missiles, and mortars against Israel just to bail out another Palestinian terror group. It has a different function in the axis of resistance. And to prevent it from getting there, they are bringing online these other elements. So it's a risk. And so far, we seem to be taking the bait and allowing them to run this risk.
Thank you so much. My next question is to Dalia before I go to some of the questions in the chat. And Dalia, I want to circle back to the economic side of this whole situation. The fact that US does have significant business interests in Baghdad, that they've concluded very significant financial contracts with Baghdad earlier this year, and also some of the other regional actors, specifically the Saudis and Emiratis, also invested a lot of money. How are these regional financial interests impacted by this current uncertainty, this current fear about escalation in Gaza? We have seen that some of the Arab and Muslim actors try to limit the economic impact by blocking a motion to impose embargoes, sanctions, and so forth that could further contribute to this destabilization despite their rhetoric. But on the Iraq end, what measures can they take to protect their interests? Is there anything they can do, and is there any kind of pressure they could put on militias and on Hamas to prevent escalation on that side? They can only pressure Israel so much, and I doubt Israel will listen when it comes to its own security interests anyway.
Let me, before answering this question, I want to emphasize on what Michael has said. Honestly, after Biden took over until now, the Iraqi government got away with everything. The Iraqi government was violated the sanctions against Iran. I mean, it continues to violate the sanctions against Iran with no question asked. No, the American government, the Biden administration does not hold the Iraqi government accountable for whatever they're doing with Iran. They know exactly what the money that's been sent from Iraq and the dollars that were sent from Iraq to Iran. They know exactly what the militia leaders and the ties of these militia leaders to Iran. They know exactly about the weapons that are coming from Iran to all these militias. However, the Biden administration is not willing to take any action. It's not enough to, when we have Iraqi pro-Iran militias targeting US personnel inside Iraq, it's not enough to attack militias in Syria. I mean, it was quite clear with the Trump administration when they sent a clear message to the militias and to Iran that the clear message was by killing Qasem Soleimani. And it stopped right there. When Biden came, Iraq, the Iraqi government, the pro-Iran Iraqi government, is free to do whatever without any accountability. I mean, that shows the failure of this administration on how to deal with Iran. Washington, D.C., when all these Iraqi official delegates come to the U.S., some of the same officials that are within the government, they are terrorists. They lead terrorist groups like Hadi al-Amiri, for instance, and many others. However, Washington would open the doors for them. Washington sits with them and discuss issues that there's no business for us to discuss with terrorists. And this is very important. And I believe that until we get a Republican president and a Republican administration in the White House, Iraq and Iran and the pro-Iran militias would get away with anything and everything. So this is a very important message that if you want to teach a lesson to the Iraqi militias, you attack them inside Iraq. They are different than other militias and Hezbollah. You don't attack Hezbollah, or you don't attack militias in Syria to teach the Iraqi government or to teach the militias a lesson, the same lesson that they were taught, and it was a hard lesson when Qasem Soleimani was assassinated. When it comes to economy, so far what's happening, it's not affecting the economy in Iraq. Iraq has very strong ties with Iran when it comes to everything. I mean, they get everything from Iran, even products that Iran is not famous of producing, they get it from Iran. So I don't believe that it would be what's happening in Gaza would have an impact on the Iraqi economy.
Irina, can I add just one footnote to Dalia's very good point in the beginning there about the need to respond?
Yes, please, go ahead.
I'll be very brief. Dalia, I couldn't agree with you more, and I just want to bring to the attention of the audience. There was a Washington Post story in June or July 2021, actually bragging about the lower threshold for the use of force that the Biden administration had compared to the Trump administration. The Trump threshold was clear. It was like, if you kill an American, we will respond. But that is a very high bar because there's been lots of attacks that don't kill Americans. The Biden administration, to its credit, began to respond before the loss of life, but it omitted exactly what you just mentioned, which is the key to this entire equation, which is it responded in a place more often where the cost of a military response was cheap. And in essence, Syria is a free fire zone. Unfortunately, many don't care about the domestic politics of Syria, but this proves they have no view, vision, plan, strategy for Iraq because they are restraining in Iraq. Last summer, Michael remembers this, I think CENTCOM or Operation Inherent Resolve tweeted a map of a drone coming from Iraq attacking US positions in Syria. The US, again, deleted the map later because it didn't want to be seen as saying that, yeah, like the Iraq problem, even though we're not responding, is still a big problem. So, a lot of people are talking about restoring deterrence, which is this very, problematic way to even talk about deterrence. But, step number one to effectuating that is exactly what you just said. And I want to underscore that for the audience, which is respond to the point of origin against these attacks. It's great to hit depots and facilities where there are storages of weapons and all this kind of stuff, but that's stuff the US should be doing anyway before even getting attacked. Why are we letting these arsenals build up that can strike US forces, that can strike Israel, that can strike America's Arab partners in the region? We should be going after these arsenals anyway. But when we are hit, we have to respond at the point of origin. And you touching on the failure to do that gets to the heart of actually the failure of the administration's Middle East strategy.
And now I'll head off to a question to the entire panel from the chat, and anyone else who wants to contribute a question can do so. Is there a concern the Iraqi militias will pull off an operation to the one similar to the one planned by Soleimani before he was liquidated, such as storming the embassy? Can we see a more serious attack out inside Baghdad, despite these economic concerns, but someone simply going out of control, or by Iran deciding to escalate in a surprising way while finding some other means to protect its these economic resources?
And can I take the first stab at that? I'll take the first stab at that.
Sure, go ahead.
Every adversary from ISIS to Hezbollah to Hamas to Al-Qaeda are watching the riots in the United States, are watching the protests in the United States. And when they see protesters storm the White House gate and not be met with deterrence, or they see people climbing on the White House gates, or going into the halls of Congress or into the Senate halls, why would they worry about storming a U.S. embassy in Baghdad? The U.S. The Biden administration is not doing anything about what's going on here, and that's the White House. Why wouldn't they think about it? And just to add some credibility to the threats, Muqtada al-Sadr, who leads Jaish al-Mahdi, or whatever version it is now,
Saraya Salam, yeah.
Yes, Saraya Salam has called for the shutting down of the U.S. embassy, and if not voluntarily, by force. Now, Muqtada al-Sadr talks a big game. He doesn't normally do a lot of things, but I wouldn't be surprised if the militias are emboldened to do something, especially after these 6 fighters were killed. But I'm really worried about back-channel conversations to Baghdad, whether or not the U.S. is apologizing for killing these militiamen. Were they getting ready to fire a rocket or a missile, or were they at the storage facility where they were warned not to be at? And that's been the standard practice. Your audience may wonder, like, why is Mike saying this? Because that's exactly what the Biden administration did. They would tip off the Iraqi prime minister about an attack on one of these militia positions in order for the Baghdad, prime minister's office and others to warn them not to be there, because we didn't want to have collateral damage. We didn't want to have the death of these militiamen. And I wouldn't be surprised. We have to remember that the storming of the embassy prior to taking out Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes was a rehearsal. It was a rehearsal to see what they could get away with. They didn't go in with weapons. They went in with flags. And they got close to the embassy and they started, trying to break the glass, but they didn't have weapons. This could be different this time. Remember, it was the hostage crisis where they were able to take American hostages during a weak President Carter administration in order to try to get concessions. That led all the way up to the election of Ronald Reagan, where Ronald Reagan made the threat and they released the prisoners, right? They released the hostages. This is that window. This is that window where our enemies think they have a permissive environment, where they think it's green light chaos to go and get all you can. If you want to get more concessions from the United States, you take American hostages. That's what Hamas did in Israel. That's what Iran does with its dual citizens. They use them as pawns. And if you want pawns in order to get more concessions from the Biden White House and to get this moral equivalency position from Tony Blinken about all sides need to stop, you do it. Anyway, I think it's a credible threat. And I think there's plenty of indicators that they're thinking that way. And I think there's plenty of indicators on their end that see that the Biden administration won't do a thing about it.
But let me add to what Michael
Mhm.
has said. I want to remind everybody of September 11th, 2012, where the U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens, who was a friend of mine, was attacked and killed in Benghazi. From what we've seen, it would be no surprise, and definitely because of the weakness that the U.S. Administration is showing inside the U.S., as Michael said, and outside, it would be very easy for the militias to attack and the U.S. embassy and to relive Benghazi in 2012. The thing is, yes, there are leaders of these pro-Iran militias, the Shia militias, and Muqtada al-Sadr, but the thing is, all these fighters and all these well-armed militia members, they're not waiting for an order. Easily, they could just regroup and go and attack anything and anybody, including the U.S. embassy, under the pretext of jihad. So it's most likely that would happen. I don't see any reason why not, especially now there is a movement inside Iraq to push the parliament to expel the U.S. ambassador and close the American embassy in Iraq.
Just a footnote to all that stuff. I'll keep it very quick, Irina. November 4, 1979, or on the Iranian calendar, the 13th of Aban should always be in the background here. And Michael used the R word, rehearsal, and Dalia just showed how another rehearsal became an actual stage event with major fatalities, the one in Libya and Benghazi, of course. Just to go back into history, that storming of the embassy, yes, it was with a slightly different group in Tehran, but twice between February 11, 1979 and November 4, 1979, they tried to storm different groups. Actually, it was like an Islamist Marxist faction one time, a leftist, guerrilla group another time. But nonetheless, they had tried. So, what is the phrase? Art imitates life, or life imitates art. We're seeing in real time the attempt, as Michael said, see what they can get away with. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's more tries, because the ultimate goal might still be there.
So, Hezbollah has been mentioned a number of times in this discussion, and I want to follow up on that with this quote. While Israel has been dealing with humanitarian pauses in Gaza, there is this question, to quote a diplomatic contact of mine, a so-called Nasrallah pause in Iraq, a strange, quiet, sort of a strange kind of feeling throughout the Baghdad and the militia circles. And we have seen that Nasrallah has spoken twice already. The first time he sent kind of a mixed message, one to the West, basically saying we're going to hold off until Hamas is really desperate, and the other seemed to be a kind of fatwa permitting further involvement by militias. And the second speech was more focused on more specific issues, such as trying to once again pressure Egypt into opening up its borders. That would certainly serve the Islamists there well in light of the upcoming elections. But what is the real connection between these Iraqi groups and Nasrallah, and what kind of message are they expecting? What is this strange atmosphere all about? And anyone can answer that.
Let me start with that. The Iraqi factions or the Iraqi militias would like to feel and would like to act like they are the militias number one, and they are the leaders of the what they call resistance in the in not only in Iraq but in the region itself, thinking that they are the closest to Iran, and due to the leadership, their leaderships from different factions, and due to the closeness of the Iraqi government or / government to Iran. Therefore, I mean, I've seen videos and from Iraq, and I've been following all the Iraqi media coverage to these. I mean, the what they're doing, or these militia leaders, they're just giving words and you know, statements after statements, but in reality, they haven't done anything. And I don't think they would want to go to Israel, or they would want to move anywhere. They're doing well so far on oppressing the Iraqi people. They don't want to lose their grip on the Iraqi people before anything else. The worst case scenario, they go to Lebanon, they stand by the borders or by a restaurant, like a Palestinian restaurant, like a Nablus, for instance. And that's when they say, we will do this and we will do this. And then 1 week later, they're back in Baghdad. So I don't think the road to Jerusalem doesn't go anywhere. It stays like in a circle in Iraq.
Mhm. Does anyone else
Yeah,
want? Mhm.
just maybe very briefly on that. Yeah, a lot of these non-bordering proxy groups have a function to play, like Dalia was saying, in the actual country. That's what makes the axis of resistance so effective. It's a foreign patron with a local actor where the interests are merged. And in this sense, Lebanese Hezbollah is really the only outsized proxy that has been transposed to so many other geographies. The norm is that the other ones tend to stay put. Iraq, Syria, because that border technically doesn't exist in the minds of these proxies. You have the Assad regime and then basically an open expanse between Baghdad and the Assad regime. Michael referred to the land bridge, but otherwise they remain confined to the geographies. It's Lebanese Hezbollah that is the plug between the Quds force and the Arab proxy. You know, you've seen Lebanese Hezbollah train these Iraqi militias in Iran in the start of the U.S. conflict in Iraq after 2003. You've heard reports of Lebanese Hezbollah inside Yemen as the Houthi war against Saudi Arabia heated up 2015, 16, 17, 18. You've had, obviously, 2013 decisive interference by Lebanese Hezbollah with the Syrian armed forces in select battles, like from Qusair. They literally turned the tide of a battle in 2013 and then began to operate more effectively with the Quds force. And, you know, on the picture that Dalia mentioned, there is that, you know, command center, that combined arms operation center in Beirut. That's really Hezbollah, the Quds force, IRGC, and the Palestinian groups. It doesn't seem to bring in those Iraqi elements. It doesn't mean one shouldn't be afraid of it, but the Iraqi elements have a role to play within Iraq and Syria themselves. And the turning on and turning off of each of these militias is based on a different calculation. Again, Hezbollah is reserved for a conventional deterrence against Israel to prevent a strike on Iran's nuclear program. The Houthis can be equal opportunity offender, but mostly against the Arabs and increasingly now against Israel. Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, number one target is going to be the U.S. to reduce the U.S. force posture in the region. The Iranians literally call the U.S. bases between Iraq and Syria lumps of meat under the teeth. And the teeth are supposed to be the militia firepower.
And my last
One thing I
question.
wanted to
Oh,
say,
sure, go
yeah,
ahead.
just to add to that, just to do a footnote, as Ben would say, is Lebanese Hezbollah is well respected by the Iraqi militias, maybe not at the Nasrallah level, but at the operational commander level. You know, Musa Dakduk, the Karbala 5, in 2006 and 7. I mean, that was a Lebanese commander telling Iraqi militias how to conduct kidnapping operations, how to conduct a complex raid on a U.S. facility. It's Lebanese Hezbollah that is so respected by, you know, Israel and other countries. We have to remember that Israel conducted 6-hour airstrikes in Syria targeting Iraqi militias because Lebanese Hezbollah said, it's not us, it was the Iraqi militias that just launched those rockets and missiles. It was Lebanese Hezbollah that told Israel, it's not us, it's the Iraqi militias. And Israel was able to conduct a 6-hour airstrike campaign targeting IRGC facilities and Iraqi militias. And, you know, again, the Iraqi militias have not demonstrated success on the battlefield. It's Lebanese Hezbollah that can operate at the battalion level, the brigade level, the division level, using combined arms tactics, meaning artillery in support of ground forces. You know, an air capability when it comes to, you know, I wouldn't say near capability, but a rocket and missile capability when it comes to continuing the fight. They're able to hit a deep target while their ground forces advance. The Iraqi militias can't do that. They are learning how to fire precision rockets and missiles, and they are learning how to fire or use drones. And when they've done that, when they've sent a drone or a rocket or a missile inside of that Israeli radar bubble, it's been Lebanese Hezbollah that has said, it's not us, it's them. So that dynamic is still at play.
My last question is about the new Iraqi militias that has emerged to attack Israel just within the last few days. And parallel to that, I'm also hearing a new Yemeni militias that are adjacent to the Houthis that are also emerging. What does it say about this new dynamic of emerging militias? Are they alternatives? Are they competitors to the existing set of actors? Are they just a way for Iran to project more power? Are they cutouts to avoid the main groups from being targeted? What is their role, and what can be said about the dynamics of these multilateral conflicts going forward?
Can I jump in on this one first?
Yes, please.
One of the things that Brett McGurk told the Iraqi prime minister when the Biden administration took over, and also tried to tell them that during the Trump administration, is that we will not target any group that is not designated a foreign terrorist organization. So what did they start doing? They started creating these new militias. When they were going after the Iraqi Shia protest movement, they created new militias to target them because they believed that if the entity was not a foreign terrorist organization, it wouldn't be targeted. And Brett McGurk told them directly that that was the position of the United States. So as you see the creation of these new militias, they haven't been designated. And one of the things the Biden administration should do is every time one of these militias pops up, there should be an FTO designation immediately so that they will send that the right message that these entities will be targeted also. But it's hard to say that when you haven't targeted them to begin with.
Let me add, it's like it became very profitable for everybody. Like when you create a militia, then you, first of all, you have power in your neighborhood, you have power in your, and I'm talking in Iraq. So you get money, you get power, even that little power on your neighbors and on your in your province. And the militia leaders will have businesses, and nobody could touch them. So the economic side of creating militias or being militia members is very good. That's why we see so many, and we're going to hear of many to be created.
Yeah, this is just super brief. Nothing sells like success. Michael was mentioning the Mehdi Army, and Dalia mentioned new name for the offshoot. There was a time the U.S. had an acronym, JAM, the Jaish al-Mehdi Special Forces, 2005-06. And that was just one umbrella term. But look at the umbrella of the umbrellas that exist today. If you want to pinpoint it, mid-2020, early 2021, as the rocket attack stepped up after the killing of Soleimani, in essence, you had a bunch of new groups, Usbat Tahrir, Asab al-Kaf, like all these groups that are fronts of fronts of fronts for the IRGC. So today we're in a world where the proxies of Iran have their own proxies. And it's precisely to avoid this designation, name and shame campaign, to avoid political accountability, even in the slightest, because they control politics as well, not just the gun. And in essence, this is, ripe for low-hanging fruit for Treasury and State to begin a designations offensive, to get data on their ties to designated Shia militia groups, to get data on their ties back to the command and control center in Tehran, and to either have individual SDGT or FTO designations or amend existing designations to say these names are fronts and cutouts and AKAs for already sanctioned organizations. So there's a lot of rolling up the sleeves to do here and work to be done.
But does that actually mean that there isn't a significant increase in recruitment? That this is just a reshuffling of the same actors? Or is Iran and their proxies more successful in actually gaining additional followers as a result of all these games and this appearance of success?
When we've seen the creation of these groups in the past, they're just simply manned with Kitab Hezbollah fighters and Asab al-Haq fighters. They just use a new term and they can move between these organizations. So they demonstrate a capability that makes the U.S. intelligence officer wonder, is this a new group with an increased capability? No, it's just a new group that hasn't been designated yet with the same capabilities that were in Kitab Hezbollah and Asab al-Haq, Harakat Nujaba, and Kitab Imam Ali, those types of groups. So it's just the same skill, the same skilled operators, the talent, just moving under a different name in order to, present the illusion that there are these new militias. They can stand up. They could be on a parade field and show 1,000 people in the ranks, but it wouldn't be the talent. The talent is dispersed amongst those 4 groups. And when they start, when they create one of these militias and they conduct operations, it's that talent from those 4 or 5 militias that man this entity for that short period of time. And there'll be another entity next week and the week after. It's just a repetition, but it's the same talent.
They recycle themselves under different names, basically it.
So that certainly seems like a very old Islamist and Soviet and every kind of authoritarian strategy since the beginning of time, that it creates these optics, but it sounds like there is absolutely nothing really fundamentally new about anything that they're doing, which is in some ways good news. Thank you so much to all the panelists for this very rich, very thought-provoking discussion on a topic that is barely discussed in the mainstream media today. After the series of new attacks, I have not seen anything in the English language media about these new attacks. I just saw I saw a couple of comments on Twitter, and there's been no updates to these attacks on U.S. troops since the strikes in the news sources, which is telling of itself. Despite over 50 attacks, there's very little discussion about what's going on here and what kind of damage it's doing. I hope this conversation will start the dynamic of at least thinking about these regional concerns beyond the immediate back and forth between Israel and Hamas. That's not going away anytime soon. The war will continue, but the regional impact is just as important. Thank you so much to the audience for participating, and I hope you come back to join us on other programs of the API. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much.
Thank you so much, Irina. Good to see you all.